There's another one from Zero Hedge. I had to do this one because, again, Trump has surrounded himself with Goldman Sachs. Having said that, so was Obama, so was Bush, right? Government, Treasury Secretary, these are all Goldman alumni. All of them. Buying for, not the people, for Goldman. Government by Goldman, Zero Hedge. Steve Bannon was in the room the day Donald Trump first fell for Gary Cohn. Goldman guy, of course. So were Reince Priebus, Jared Kushner, and Trump's pick for Secretary of Treasury, Steven Mnuchin. It was the end of November, 3 weeks after Trump's improbable victory, and Cohn, then still president of Goldman Sachs, was at Trump Tower, presumably at the invitation of Kushner, with whom he was friendly. Cohn was there to offer his views about jobs and the economy, but like the man he was there to meet, he was at heart a salesman. On the campaign trail, Trump had spoken often about the importance of investing in infrastructure, yet the president-elect had apparently failed to appreciate that the government would need to come up with hundreds of billions of dollars to fund his plans. Cohn, brash and bold, wired to attack any money-making opportunity, pitched a fix that would put Wall Street firms at the center. Private industry partners could help infrastructure get fixed, saving the federal government from going deeper into debt. The way the moment was captured by the New York Times, among other publications, Trump was dumbfounded. Quote, "Is this true?" he asked. Was $1 trillion infrastructure plan likely to increase the deficit by $1 trillion? Confronted by nodding heads, an unhappy president-elect said, "Why did I have to wait to have this guy tell me?" Within 2 weeks, the transition team announced that Cohn would take over as director of the president's National Economic Council. Number one, Goldman. Actually, I don't even see a number two. Actually, there is two. 1 and 2. 1, Goldman always wins. Goldman Sachs has been a favorite cudgel for candidate Trump, the symbol of a government that favors Wall Street over its citizenry. Trump proclaimed that Hillary Clinton was in the firm's pockets, as was Ted Cruz. It was Goldman Sachs that Trump singled out when he railed against a system rigged in favor of the global elite, one that robbed our working class, stripped our country of wealth, and put money into the pockets of a handful of large corporations and political entities. End quote. Cohn has, as president and chief operating officer of Goldman Sachs, had been at the heart of it all. Aggressive and relentless, a former aluminum sliding salesman and commodities broker with a nose for making money, Cohn had had turned Goldman's sleepy home loan unit into what a Senate staffer called one of the largest mortgage trading desks in the world. There, he aggressively pushed his sales team to sell mortgage-backed securities to unaware investors, even as he watched over The Big Short, Goldman's decision to bet billions of dollars that the market would collapse. Now, Cohn would be coordinating economic policy for the populist president. The conflicts between the two men were striking. Cohn ran a giant investment bank with offices and financial capitals around the globe, one deeply committed to a world with few economic borders. Trump's nationalist campaign contradicted everything Goldman Sachs and its top executives represented on the global stage. Trump raged against offshoring by American companies during the 2016 campaign. He even threatened retribution, a 35% tariff, on any goods imported into the United States by a company that had moved jobs overseas. But Cohn laid out Goldman's very different view of offshoring at an investor conference in Naples, Florida, back in November. There he explained unapologetically that Goldman had offshored its back office staff, including payroll and IT, to Bangalore, India, now home to the firm's largest office outside New York City. We hire people there because they work for cents on the dollar versus what people work for in the United States, end quote. Candidate Trump promised to create millions of new jobs, vowing to be the greatest jobs president that God ever created. Cohn, as Goldman Sachs president and COO, oversaw the firm's mergers and acquisitions, business that had, over the previous 3 years, led to the loss of at least 22,000 U.S. jobs, according to a study by two advocacy groups. Early in his candidacy, Trump described discussing Pfizer's decision to buy a small Irish competitor in order to execute a corporate inversion, a maneuver in which a U.S. company moves its headquarters overseas to reduce its tax burden. The Pfizer deal ultimately fell through, but in 2016, in the heat of the Tyco International, but in 2016, in the heat of the campaign, Goldman advised on a mega deal that saw Johnson Controls, a Fortune 500 company based in Milwaukee, buy the Ireland-based Tyco International with the same goal. A few months later, with Goldman's help, Johnson Controls had executed its inversion. With Cohen's appointment, Trump now had 3 Goldman Sachs alums in top positions inside his administration. Steve Bannon, who was a vice president at Goldman when he left the firm in 1990, a chief strategist, and Steve Mnuchin, who had spent 17 years at Goldman as Treasury Secretary. And there was more to come. A few weeks later, another Goldman partner, Dina Powell, joined the White House as a senior counselor for economic initiatives. Goldman was a longtime client of Jay Clayton, Trump's choice to chair the Securities and Exchange Commission. Clayton had represented Goldman after the 2008 financial crisis, and his wife, Gretchen, worked there as a wealth management advisor. And there was the brief, colorful tenure of Anthony Scaramucci as White House Communications Director. Scaramucci had been a vice president at Goldman Sachs before leaving to co-found his own investment company. Even before Scaramucci, Senator Elizabeth Warren, Democrat, Massachusetts, had joked that enough Goldman alum were working for the Trump administration to open a branch office in the White House. Quote, "There was a devastating financial crisis just over 8 years ago," Warren said. "Goldman Sachs was at the heart of that crisis. The idea that the president is now going to turn over the country's economic policy to a senior Goldman executive turns my stomach," end quote. Prior administrations often had 1 or 2 people from Goldman serving in top positions. George W. Bush at one point had 3. At its peak, the Trump administration effectively had 6. Earlier this summer, Trump boasted about his team of economic advisors at a rally in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. "This is the president of Goldman Sachs. Smart," Trump said, "having him represent us. He went from massive paydays to peanuts." Trump waved off anyone who might question his decision to rely on the very people he had demonized. "Somebody said, 'Why did you appoint a rich person to be in charge of the economy?' I said, 'Because that's the kind of thing we want.' He needed great, brilliant minds, business minds, so the world doesn't take advantage of us." How else could he get the job done? Quote, "I love all people, rich or poor, but in those particular positions, I just don't want a poor person." Does that make sense? Trump asked. The crowd cheered. Years of financial disclosure forms confirm that Cohen is indeed very rich. At the end of 2016, he owned some 900,000 shares of Goldman Sachs stock, a stake worth around $220 million on the day Trump announced his appointment. Plus, he'd sold 1 million more Goldman shares over the previous half-dozen years. In 2007 alone, the year of the Big Short, Goldman Sachs paid him nearly $73 million, more than the firm paid CEO Lloyd Blankfein. The disclosure forms Cohen filled out to join the administration indicate he owned assets valued at $252 million to $611 million. That may or not include $65 million parting gift Goldman's board of directors gave him for outstanding leadership, just days before Trump was sworn in. Like anyone taking a top job in the Trump administration, Cohen was required to sign a pledge vowing not to participate for the next 2 years in any matter that is directly and substantially related to my former employer or former clients, including regulations and contracts. But presidents have sometimes issued waivers to these requirements, and it is unclear whether the Trump administration is making such waivers public. Senators Warren and Tammy Baldwin, a Democrat from Wisconsin, sent Cohen a letter a few days ago. They brought up the $65 million bonus and asked him to publicly recuse himself from any issue that could have a direct or significant indirect impact on his old firm. Cohen never responded to the letter, and if he has ever received a waiver, it has not been made available to the public or the Office of Government Ethics. quote, consistent with the Trump administration's stringent ethics rules, Mr. Cohn will recuse himself from participating in any matter directly involving his former employer, Goldman Sachs. White House spokesperson Natalie Strom said. The White House will not comment further. The White House declined requests to make Cohn available for an interview and declined to answer a detailed set of questions. Cohn shared the podium with fellow Goldman alum Mnuchin, the two made partner there the same year, when the administration unveiled its new tax plan, one that, if the past is prelude, had the potential to save Goldman more than $1 billion a year in corporate taxes. The president had promised to do a number on financial reforms implemented after the 2008 subprime crisis, including one that threatened to cost Goldman several $billion a year in revenues. Under Cohn, the administration has introduced new rules easing initial public offerings, a Goldman Sachs specialty dating back to the start of the last century, when the firm handled IPOs of Sears, Roebuck, F.W. Woolworth, and Studebaker. As Trump's top economic policy advisor, Cohn can exert influence over regulatory agencies that have shaken billions in penalties and settlements out of Goldman Sachs in recent years, and his former colleagues inside Goldman's public sector and infrastructure group likely appreciate the Trump administration's infrastructure plan, which is more or less exactly as Cohn first pitched it inside Trump Tower back in November. So there's quite a bit more to this article, like a lot more, massive more. And I'd be here for probably 40 minutes reading this. I think you get the point. Is Donald Trump doing this for a reason? That may make sense to you and I later. I'm going to say, I hope so. But I know history. And when Goldman Sachs is always in the White House and they're always running the government, and now there's a ton more of them there than ever before, I mean, not looking too good, is it? But hey, you never know. Trump has, everything out of that man's mouth has been true so far. Like all the accusations he made. Oh, this is ridiculous. He wasn't spied on. They weren't tapping his damn phone. Oh, actually they were. And the people around him. And even before the election and whatnot. Whoa. He was right. He also was a little bit involved in the Obama birth certificate scandal, if you recall. I'd love to see something come of that. I'd love to see Hillary get freaking nailed. I'd love to see the Clintons go down. But I think I know better. I'm not going to hold my breath, and I don't suggest you do either. Take care.